Are you a high-achieving dental entrepreneur frustrated by the gap between where you are and where you want to go? Are you tired of advisors whose advice keeps you merely surviving when you should be thriving? I'm Tim McNeely, and I believe you deserve to build true wealth so you can take even better care of the people you love, the causes you care about, and leave your dent in the universe. Welcome to the Dental Wealth Nation Show, where we hand you the keys to unlock true wealth quicker and with less effort than you ever thought. Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Dental Wealth Nation Show. And I'm so excited to have you here today because we're talking about water. Now, look, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking water. It's just what shows up in my utility bill. But the truth is, water is so much more than that. And water is actually the most used instrument in your practice. And I believe it deserves the same level of attention that you give your clinical protocols, you give to your patient experience, and your reputation. By the time we finish today, you're going to have the clarity and confidence to really assess how water flows through your office. It touches everything from patient safety to regulatory compliance to even environmental impact, but more importantly, the long-term value of your dental practice. And you're going to leave here feeling inspired to lead boldly, to make informed decisions, and to really protect your patients, your team, and your legacy. And wow, I am so excited to have Steve Craig here today. Steve is a DSO and industry partner. He's vice president of sales at Somatics. But what I love about Steve and in my conversations with him is just the passion that he brings to helping you build solutions around water in your office so that you can protect yourself, that you can really build in efficiencies and build that long-term impact and value that you are working on. So Steve, welcome to the show.
I appreciate, Tim. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, right. It's fun how we connected, right? I came across you on LinkedIn. I saw your profile. I'm like, how do I not know you? We have a lot of shared connections. And we did a call, and I was just blown away by the things that I was learning from you. And I've been in the industry like you about 20 years, but we still learn new things and things that we aren't aware of. And so I am just so excited to talk about this. But before we get into water and the importance of it, give us just a little bit about your background and the leadership that you have been bringing to the industry. How did you get started in this?
Yeah, I spent about almost 10 years on the ophthalmology side of medical, and a friend of a friend spoke to me about an opportunity with Johnson & Johnson. They were getting into more of the dental space, and they were really looking to enhance both the DSO and the commercial side of the business. I interviewed for that position and ended up switching and leaving ophthalmology. I wouldn't say I was burnt out. I was probably bored out in what I was doing on the kind of sales leadership side, and it seemed like a great opportunity. We started out kind of really building out the DSO space at J&J. Then eventually I moved into a leadership role, running sales divisions inside that, primarily in kind of the hygiene and implant dentistry side of things. And then I received a phone call from my original CEO from J&J days and talked to me about dental water. And I'd been in dentistry for 20 years, and I wasn't really 100% sure what he was talking about. Wasn't sure if he was talking about dispensers in the break room or what he was talking about. But when he really explained it to me, it seemed like an incredible opportunity. We were taking, 4 different dental companies, merging them into one. And really the goal was to build out the only comprehensive lineup of end-to-end water solutions. So really the only manufacturer that handles, water in, through, and out of a dental practice. And it seemed exciting for me to really get into that. Once I learned of kind of the lack of education in the dental water space. So that's a little bit about me and kind of where I'm at. Like you said, currently right now, I'm the vice president in the Central in Canada for an organization called Somatics, which is a combination of Somatics, which kind of handles amalgam capture and vacuum line cleaners, Stericyl, which handles water testing, water treatment, and Dry Shield, which is isolation dentistry. And then we do have a separate arm to our business, which is Implant, which sells the oxygen plug for socket preservation. So I manage a team that kind of handles all 4 of those markets moving into dentistry to
Hmm.
really make the office, the patients, the teams, and the environment safer.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to water, right, in practice owners, right, what do you really wish practice owners understood more about their responsibility when it comes to water and the safety in the office?
Well, I think we're all in this together. It's not really about the water that enters your building or if you're buying distilled water to use in your practice. We're talking about thin tubing that runs all throughout the office. So,
Hmm.
the water comes into your practice. It might be great water, it might not be great water. But really, what happens is, as that travels through the dental practice, through that dental chair, it's a breeding ground for biofilm and everything else to breed, and bacteria and all that to get in that chair. And I think the other thing that people miss a lot of times is, you open up a brand new office. We work heavily in the DSO space. And obviously, a lot of times you're going to open up a de novo office, you're going to buy a chair. Well, that dental manufacturer had to test that chair. So a lot of times they're testing that chair to make sure it works. They're then going to shrink wrap it. It could sit in a warehouse for who knows how long, and then it comes to your practice. Well, that biofilm is already built up inside that because the chair's been out of use once it was tested. So there's all different aspects of dental water that unfortunately, we just don't think about, and we just kind of take for granted.
Hmm. Well, what are some of the dangers that can arise from taking this from granted? I mean, right? What can happen to patients, to the office? Are there real risk involved in this?
I mean, obviously there can be. What happens. There's a lot of outbreaks that take place. Washington's the only state that mandates testing and treating of water. Georgia is getting ready to come on board, and Maryland's probably not far behind that. And what happens is it comes from outbreaks. Anaheim's probably the biggest case that happened out in Anaheim, where there was hundreds of unfortunately kids in a pediatric practice,
Hmm.
anywhere from ones that they found out what happened a couple days up to 450 days later. And unfortunately, those children lost parts of their jawbone, were hospitalized many times, are on massive antibiotics for life, and it really changes the aspect of those kids. I don't think it's anything anybody intentionally wanted to happen to the practice. But like I said, dental water is one of those things that's kind of out of sight, out of mind. Like I said, it's not just about the water ending in your practice. It's what's happening inside your practice. Are you effectively shocking your lines? Are you testing your lines? Are you treating your lines to make sure that after you test, to hopefully we can maintain till the next test? The answer is all over the board of what we see out there.
Hmm. Wow. Now, we're talking about both water and leadership today. And as we talk about, there certainly is an element of compliance that has to take place in the practice, right? Compliance with rules, regulations, all of that. But there's also a leadership aspect too. And so, what really separates kind of a reactive compliance from proactive leadership in this space?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to, someone has to own the process.
Hmm.
That's what we do a lot. We work with groups to really try to help them develop a protocol that's going to work for them. It's a lot easier to sign the back of a check than the front of the check. So money always comes into play for compliance. But you have to really think about, is that my mom, my dad, my kids,
Hmm.
my aunt, my uncle, my cousins sitting in that chair? What type of water would I want running through the office and entering the patient, through that. So I think a lot of it is around the leadership side of somebody owning that process, taking it very seriously, and protecting, not like I said, not only the environment, but really protecting the patient. And I think the one that's over missed a lot are the teams.
Hmm.
Ohio State University did a study showing that 79% of the aerosols that come out of the water lines are coming out right out of the dental unit water line, which means the assistants, the hygienists, the dentists are breathing that
Wow.
in.
Wow.
So it's also protecting your team, so they stay safe and compliant as well.
Hmm. Oh my gosh. Well, right. A lot of times it's been said that water is the number one dental instrument in an office, and can you just unpack that a little bit for us? Right. If it really is one of the most used things, why do you think it so often gets overlooked?
Well, I mean, dentistry is a business. So water is used in almost every procedure in dentistry. When you think about it, when you sit in the chair, there's a suction, there's the water lines, water is running. That's how dentistry is performed. But I think a lot of times we just take for granted. Unfortunately, you walk into your house, you flip on the sink, you get a glass of water. You use water to wash your hands, to shower, to bathe, all that. But there's parts of the world and the country that isn't the case. So I think a lot of times, just because where we're at in the U.S., we kind of take it for granted that the water's safe, the water's clean, and everything's perfect. But like I said, it's not just about the water entering the practice. It's also, what is happening throughout the practice, which, you have those small little lines that carry the water throughout the practice. Well, those are breeding grounds for biofilm and bacteria, which, can get into some dangerous zones pretty fast. It replicates extremely fast. And that's why it's great that you use distilled water. It's great that your municipality has really clean water. But if you're not testing, how do you know your water's safe? How do you know it hasn't changed? That is where we have a lot of conversations around, how do you test to make sure the water's safe? If it's not safe, how do you shock to make sure you get it back to a safe level? And then, like I said, how do you enter a low antimicrobial in to maintain those water lines in between those testing and shocking periods?
Wow, right. It really sounds like it's an awareness issue and an awareness problem. So I live here in the Central Valley of California. It's a desert, Steve, right? Well, we got no business growing agriculture out here, but yet we do. And when I first moved to the Central Valley, right, I was in that position that you just mentioned, where it's like, I grew up in LA. I turn on the faucet, out comes water. I thought that's pretty simple.
Yep.
But all of a sudden, I moved here 20 years ago, and I start learning about everything that goes on. And I'll tell you, I don't drive by an orchard now or the California aqueduct or look at rivers the same way anymore, because I've been educated on that. And it sounds like this is really what's going on in dental offices too, right? You may have built your office or bought an office, and you're like, well, does the water work? Yeah, it works. Great. And that's all the thought that most people give to it. So like you mentioned, it really comes back to that leadership piece and someone taking ownership of it. So I love that you're bringing that in. When it comes to kind of managing water lines within the office, what do you see as some common mistakes that practices often make?
I mean, it's all over the board. For some, they just assume that the water coming in is great, or we use distilled water, so we don't need to test, shock, or treat our water lines. Others, they do a portion of that. We just test our water lines. Well, you're not maintaining them in between tests. What if you have an issue? You need to shock your lines. So it's a little bit of everything. Of a full protocol would be, making sure that you're testing your water lines, making sure you're also shocking your water lines and make sure you're maintaining them. But a lot of it also depends on the order you do that in. If you're going to shock and then test your water lines, well, you're really testing to make sure the shock took, not that the water line is safe. So a lot of it is in the order that it works. And that's where my team and I spend a lot of time of working with groups, like I said, to create that protocol that's going to work best for them and make sure they're doing things. And exactly what you said, in certain parts of the country, like California, out west, the aquifers are drying up. So that water becomes a lot more scarce. And that's one nice thing about the Stericyl line of products is you don't have to empty the water bottles every night. We don't have to, take the water, dump out the bottle every night, put in a dummy straw, let the straw dry out. As long as you're using our Citracel shock, you basically screw in a straw once a year, and it performs for you. You're still going to have to shock periodically and test periodically to make sure everything is going good, to make sure that low antimicrobial is doing its job in between those shock and testing periods. But it eliminates a lot of labor. And as obviously being the Dental Wealth Nation podcast, the more you can cut labor, the more you can make supplies cheaper, the more those EBITDA dollars are worth what they do.
Yeah, no, so true. And here on the Dental Wealth Nation show, our listeners are focused on one key thing, and that's EBITDA, EBITDA, EBITDA. And that's whether reducing labor costs, improving those top line, driving costs down, right? Or serving patients better, because that's part of growing EBITDA. But right, that's on everyone's mind. And so, you just mentioned something that amazed me, which is changing out a straw once a year. Right? Talk to me about the efficiencies that can be gained by just that one thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. The competitive straws on the marketplace, they're going to be, there's going to be a lot more steps involved in that. So if you're really going to follow the steps involved in that, you're going to save a lot to that EBITDA dollar by not having to go through the process of emptying that water bottle, putting a dummy straw in, refilling that bottle the next day, putting the straw back in. It's a lot of steps in labor. which we have, case studies we're willing to share with customers showing, how you can save money by not having to walk through all those steps. And like I said, there's certain parts of the country where you don't want to walk through that process of emptying that water bottle because water is scarce. There are parts of the country where water seems to be more abundant than others. So it's a great way to build a protocol around ways to protect those EBITDA dollars, because EBITDA is driven by growing revenue, but the more cost just makes those EBITDA dollars stronger. And that can be in cost of products, cost in labor. There's a lot of things that can impact that. Not to mention if you have an outbreak. If you had an unfortunate incident where you have an outbreak, and that's going to cost you a lot of EBITDA dollars as well.
Yeah. Well, right. And I certainly want to talk about that piece also. And that's really what, excited me too, was just the risk protection that can take place, because right as you sell a practice, there are some risk involved in that actually are related to how well your systems are working around water in the office. Can you talk a little bit about that and the risk inherent and what some of these groups are looking at when they're acquiring other practices?
Yeah, definitely. I've heard from a lot of M&A advisors that, two of the things that they look at is a cyber attack. Obviously, you have a cyber attack. Unfortunate, you're going to have to report that. It's a federal thing where you have to report that. Well, there's a possibility of a class action lawsuit. Well, that could scare some buyers away because, even if it's Tim's Dental, now Steve's Dental owns it. And that unfortunate cyber attack happened in Tim's Dental. Well, now everyone thinks it happened to Steve's Dental. So, what are the statute of limitations for that? Is there going to be a class action lawsuit? Well, same thing on the water side, except, unfortunately, a lot of the water cases are settled out of court, which is a great thing. As we talked about before, coming out of COVID, about 60% of patients don't go to the dentist in the U.S. right now. We don't want to see that number rise any. So that's where we all have to band together and make sure we're doing the right thing of making sure we do have the safest, cleanest possible water that's used in every procedure. And that comes from, opening up that regimen of really shocking testing and treating your water lines.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I've heard you talk about is this idea of a closed loop or end-to-end water solution. What does this actually look like, and how does that differ from some of the other solutions that are out there?
Yeah, so a lot of the other organizations that kind of work in that, they don't handle the full gamut. Like I said, we're the only end-to-end water solution that handles water in, through, and out of the practice. So we handle the amalgam side of things, of making sure we're capturing that amalgam back to the aquifers, making sure we're keeping the environment safe. I know a lot of people say that they don't really use amalgam anymore. There are unfortunately indigent places where amalgam is still used, but we're extracting amalgam all the time. And in most collection containers of that amalgam system, there's amalgam in there. So if you're not cutting amalgam or placing amalgam, it's getting into your system. So it's happening. And then from there, we travel into the water that's running through the practice. And that's where we have systems, we have tablets, we have straws, we have different ways to put in that low antimicrobial to make sure it's safe. And then we sell shock products and water testing products to make sure the levels are where they're at. And then we kind of move into isolation dentistry. So a product like Dry Shield is an incredible product. It's a small rubber device that is inserted in a mouth guard into the mouthpiece or into the oral cavity. And what it allows, two things, like I said before, with the staff breathing in a lot of those aerosols, it's helping control that aerosol level getting up in the air. But also during COVID, that was commonly used. But now a lot of groups look at it for staffing shortages. If you have enough dental assistants in your practice, it's great. They can now really truly get back to four-handed dentistry and not have to worry about the suction, the bite block, the tongue, the cheek, the patient. And they can really start to work with their clinician, he or she, to really work with that four-handed dentistry to make procedures faster, more efficient, more productive, which impacts EBITDA again. The faster we can treat those patients and collect that money, the better it is for everybody. But in the case where, unfortunately, you're not fully staffed, it allows a clinician not have to cancel a high-ticket item. They're not going to be as fast and efficient, but they can get through that procedure because, once again, they don't have to worry about the bite block. They don't have to worry about the cheek, the tongue, the patient, the suction. And it allows them, without an assistant, to still perform the procedure instead of having to cancel that patient and reschedule that patient, which really doesn't benefit anyone. And then from there, we have, evacuation lines. We have vacuum line cleaners. And then we have amalgam buckets and everything like that to make sure we're emptying traps, making sure we're doing everything on that full compliance. So that's where we spend a lot of time working with offices to build out that protocol, not just in the dental unit water lines, but also, where it enters the building, how the amalgam's captured, making sure we're following that process of testing, shocking, and treating our dental unit water lines to isolation dentistry, where that's the barrier where it's crossing over into the patient, in the aerosol capture, and then moving into making sure that we have an efficient vacuum line cleaner. We have a product called Power Scrub, which does amazing on the market. Most vacuum line cleaners are lubricants, and they just kind of, lubricant over and allow things to pass through the middle. Ours has 9 enzymes where it goes in and it eats away the lining of those vacuum line. And it's not really to protect the amalgam system. What it's really designed to do is how do we protect the vacuum compressor system? Unfortunately, in the heart attack patient, a little piece of plaque breaks off in an artery, travels to the heart, we have an incident. Same thing here. We don't want a little plaque bacteria to break off and travel to the vacuum, because that's the other thing that a practice, they can't run without water. They also can't run without the compressor and vacuum. That's another thing that will shut down the practice. So we have a lot of different ways to make sure we're making the practice as efficient and effective as it can, throughout that water entering through and out of the practice.
Wow. Now, Steve, we've been talking about water. We've been talking about leadership in the practice, the importance of having someone own this process, some of the risk and some of the rules. And as I listen to you talk, right, I keep thinking about the golden rule, which is, right, do unto others as you would have them do unto yourselves, right? And so that certainly applies, I think, in taking care of the office. But there's not just a golden rule. There's also an amalgam rule too. And we're going to talk about that right here when we come back from this quick break.
You're listening to the Dental Wealth Nation Show, where we give you the keys to building true wealth. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with the friends you care about. Ready to level up? Grab a copy of my #1 best-selling book, Dental Wealth Nation, and unlock the secrets of building true wealth today.
So, Steve, we are talking about the importance of water and leadership in an office. And, we talked about the golden rule, right? You take care of the system for your patients, for your staff, right? And just really watch out for those risks. But there's also an amalgam rule. We've been talking about that. Why is this such a big deal? And what are some of the risks that a practices face if they actually ignore this rule?
Yeah, there is an amalgam rule, where, an amalgam system needs to be in most offices. There are some specialty practices that are exempt from that rule. But what it's really designed for is, like I said, how do we protect the aquifers that are drying up? How do we protect the environment? Amalgam is not good to be flowing into the system, into the environment, getting back into the waterways, and then ultimately getting into patients. So the amalgam rule was put into place quite some time ago. There was a little holdup with COVID, but most offices, like I said, without a couple specialties, you should have an amalgam system in there. And what it's designed to is capture amalgam. And once again, it comes from education of making sure that individuals realize, a lot of groups will tell us that, we don't place amalgam anymore, but they find amalgam throwing through the practice, which means amalgam is coming out of those patients.
Wow.
So that's why you want to capture that. Kind of how the rule reads is, you have to empty the collection container of the amalgam system when it's full or at the 1-year mark. You also, that's to capture your wet amalgam. You also have to have an amalgam bucket that would be recycled once a year, which is for more your dry amalgam, which is pretty much anything that would touch amalgam in the patient. Could be your traps, could be your vacuum, different areas where you have to make sure you're capturing that. Any teeth that are extracted that have amalgam in them would go in that amalgam bucket. And then you have to make sure you're using a vacuum line cleaner with a pH of 6 to 8. And then you're making sure that you're keeping records for 3 years. And like you said, if you cross any of those, or if you're found not having an amalgam system in your practice, an inspector walks in, there are fines that will be placed. And especially with a lot of the DSOs we work with, if they find one office, they're probably going to go look at the rest of the offices. Depending on how many practices they have, it can get pretty costly and pretty expensive. I think most of the groups we work with now, majority of them, I would say, are a little better on the amalgam side of things and making sure they have a system. It's a little different on the dental unit waterline side of things.
Interesting. So when it comes to regulations, are there any regulatory shifts on the horizon that practice owners need to be preparing for or thinking about? Is there anything on the horizon that we need to be thinking through?
There are some. The state of Washington is the first one to implement, quarterly testing of dental unit water lines.
Wow.
Georgia is in the process of passing that now, kind of following the Washington state regulations that are in there. And that's just because there's been a couple outbreaks in the state of Georgia. It has been approved. They're just waiting for the governor to sign it to go into action. So that is sitting out there. And I think Maryland is also looking at different ways to look at that. But a lot of these are going to go against the clinician's license if they're found not to be following the rule. And that's kind of how the amalgam rule started. It was a couple states and a couple more states and a couple more states, and it was nationwide. So the anticipation is this is great for patients. It's great for the teams that work in the industry, and obviously it's great for the environment. So I think most on the compliance side of things are anticipating to see the dental unit waterline rules start to kind of impact as the amalgam rule did quite some years ago.
Wow. So there really are some things on the horizon that we should be preparing for, getting our practices ready for, and really getting ahead of, because once again, it's right. Leadership is being proactive, not reactive. And I want to keep bringing that leadership theme because right, that's so important in all areas of your dental practice. And we've kind of touched on this, but right, how can having better waterline protocols actually help enhance profitability and not just be a cost center? I know so often we're thinking, right, I don't want to write another check. I don't want to write another check, but there actually is ability to help enhance profitability through waterline protocols. So can you share a little bit around that and maybe how we can think differently about this?
Absolutely. I do believe it starts with leadership, whether, it's the top, whether it be the C-suite, the compliance directors in the DSOs or the single practice practitioner owner of the practice, setting the stage of, we want to make sure we're keeping our teams, our patients, the environment safe. So a lot of it is, and then probably assigning someone in the practice that's going to be in charge to make sure this happens. We also have a portal that easily tracks that for the compliance directors to make sure that their practices are up to date on their amalgam on the wet side with the collection containers, making sure they're up to date with the amalgam buckets on the dry side, making sure they're up to date with the replacement of their straws, making sure they're up to date with the water testing. So we have tools in place to help them, assist them with that. But a lot of it is the more efficient your practice is running. And like you talked about, the mechanical room is an area in the very beginning you talked about that is kind of out of sight, out of mind. We don't think about it. Kind of like our heating and air conditioning and sump pumps and things like that and water heaters in our house. It's down in the basement or a crawl space or whatever. We just don't think about it until there's an issue. Well, same thing here. But the more preventative you are with what I talked about in your home, it's no different than the mechanical room. The more preventative we are with the water lines, with the vacuums, with the vacuum lines, with the amalgam side of things, the better off your practice is running. And if a practice is not fully up and running, that doesn't help your EBITDA, doesn't help your revenue. I know from going in and out of thousands of offices throughout the last 20 plus years, whenever you see the service tech truck sitting in the front or the back of the office, it's not a good day. That usually means something broke down and no one's happy inside that office. The more we can get preventative, the better off we're going to be. And I think that is the word that we're starting to see in dentistry. I think AI is opening up that opportunity to really start to look at prevention of making sure we're seeing everything that we see, making sure we're looking at AI and making sure we're diagnosing what we want. But that's where we need to get to is more prevention in dentistry, whether that be what you're actually doing in the practice, helping patients accept treatment, and also making sure we're preventative to make sure the mechanical room is working the way it should, making sure the dental unit water lines running throughout the practice are performing the way they should. And that's where we focus on, like I said, the only comprehensive organization that really handles that water end to end, in, through, and out of the practice.
Yeah. Right. So, right. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, all right, Steve, I get it. I may have an issue in my office. I haven't looked at this, right? I know the water turns on, but that's about it, right? How do you go about starting to analyze this? Is this something your local, sales rep can take care of, from whatever dental supply company you're going to, or do you really need a specialist like you? How do you start sorting through, like who do you talk to?
Yeah, you definitely want to start with probably like your service tech, start with, your dealer reps. But unfortunately, they do carry a lot of products. They're very knowledgeable. But they rely on us to be kind of that specialist when it comes to that end-to-end water solutions, whether it be on the amalgam side, whether it be on the dental unit waterline side, whether it be on the isolation dentistry side. That's where they really lean on us to really help come in, assess where the organization is at. And like I said, a lot of what we do on a daily basis is help them build out a protocol that works for them. And that's, like I said, analyzing where their practice is at, what they've done, how often do they, clean out their vacuum lines, how often do they, test, shock, and treat. We evaluate all that and we help them build a protocol to make sure that they're safe and compliant, and also protecting the environment.
So what right, as the dentist, right? The next time the rep is in there, right? What are the conversations, right? How do I even start that conversation? What do I say? Is it I need to look at my entire water system, or I was listening to Steve and I realized, hey, there could be some issues. Like how do you even start that conversation?
I think a lot of it is, I think most in their heart of hearts know, do they have a protocol set up for this? Are there SOPs to manage all this? Some do, some don't. Some have a portion of it. Some don't have all of it. I think a lot of it's just taking a look in the mirror. Like we said, it's all comes down to leadership, making sure you're doing the golden rule like you talked about. From there, it's reaching out to, your supply house that you work with. And most of the times they're going to bring us in to help work with you. You can also contact us directly. We have a team that works on the commercial side. We have a team that works in the DSO space. And we spend a lot of time helping you get there. A lot of times after I have conversations or my team has conversations with offices, there's a thing that happens where, we have done a service for them that day and we've done a disservice, because probably a lot of times walking into that conversation, they didn't know what they didn't know. Walking out of that conversation, you now know, and you have to do things differently because you realize that you don't want to put the office in jeopardy. You don't want to put the patients in jeopardy. You don't want to put the teams in jeopardy. And most importantly, we're all in this together of making sure we keep the environment safe.
Yeah. Well, and kind of really what I heard you say there is it just starts with like, do you have a protocol? Do you have some SOPs, some standard operating procedures around this? And like, that's a great place, right? If you're the doctor, it could be as simple as asking your staff, like, hey, where do I find my protocols around water in the office? And if they say, you don't have any, that could be a clue that, hey, it's time to look at this. But it really sounds like it starts with just what are the protocols and then making sure you're measuring up and improving protocols or enhancing them. And so that to me really sounds like a good starting point.
It's a great starting point. And, and like you said, first you want to look and assess, do we have protocols? Then you want to look at, are we following the protocol? Are we actually doing the protocol? And I end a lot of my talks with people of, there's 5 frogs sitting on a log, 2 decided to jump. Well, how many are left? Well, there's still 5, because deciding to enact on the protocol and put it into place is one thing. Actually doing it is another thing. So like I said, it's kind of that we did a service and a disservice, because now we can help you build that protocol. And that's where our portal comes into play, because the portal is a check and balance, because we're able to track, did you replace your collection container within a year? Did you replace that bucket within a year? Did you change out your straw yearly? Have you done your quarterly testing? We're able to track a lot of that for them. And obviously, if you have one practice, it might be a little easier to manage. Once you get into 2, 3, 20, 50, 1,000, 1,900, it's a little harder to track. Is everybody doing what they're supposed to do to make sure we're on? So it's one thing to have that SOP and have that protocol in place. We also got to validate to make sure that protocol is actually being used and it's not just in a binder sitting on a shelf.
Yeah, no, I love this. And I think it's even very applicable to a group of practices who's even thinking, hey, I'm going to be out of dentistry in 24 months, or I'm looking for an exit in 12 months, right? I think it's even more critical for those groups because this is something your new buyer is going to be looking at too. And so, we started with leadership and this idea of you need someone in the office to really own the process. And leadership is often kind of fuzzy, right? There's not some good definitions sometimes. And so, my definition of leadership is really simple. It's challenging people to take action, and then more importantly, supporting them more than they've ever been supported as they take those actions. And so, if you could challenge and continue to be that leader that you are, if you could challenge every dentist listening right now to take one bold action this week, what would you challenge them to do?
My biggest challenge would be, like I said, make sure you're having that conversation of having a protocol in place. And unfortunately, what happens a lot of times is it's not somebody volunteered, somebody was voluntold that they're now in charge of the protocol. Ask around. There's probably somebody that wants to take this on and would love to take this on and would love to make sure that protocol is being followed and it's something they want to do above and beyond what they currently do. That's the place to start. Because if you have that champion that is into it, the protocol is going to get followed. If someone's voluntold that this is their new responsibility, it may or may not get done. And we experienced that. I had a DSO recently that reached out to me. They were using tablets versus straws. That's exactly what happened. We got on an operations call. Unfortunately, they had failed a test 2 months in a row. And we got everybody on the team. We said, let's get on a call and talk through. And, somebody was voluntold to watch the process. And there was another dental assistant that was voluntold to drop the tablets every day. So we kind of walked through that process. And, it was, hey, can you find Vicky? She's the one that, drops the tablets. And that's when the operations manager spoke up and said, Vicky left 2 months ago. I think we just found our problem. And then, well, who's now replaced Vicky? What Veronica did. And Veronica gets on the call and Veronica's like, I'm supposed to do what? So I was like, I think we figured out the problem. The problem is we haven't dropped tablets in 2 months. And that's where we talked to them about straws. Straws are actually cheaper than tablets. You're obviously using a lot less labor because you're not dropping a tablet or running into that human error effect of did they do it? It's there. It's set it and forget it. Like I said, as long as you're using our shock treatment, you're screwing a straw once a year. You still got to test and shock those lines to make sure you're keeping up with the low antimicrobial that comes out of that straw to maintain the line. But it's a lot less labor than having somebody empty a water bottle every night, drop tablets, do a lot of different things. So that would be my biggest suggestion of really finding a champion that wants to do this. And then it always stays with leadership. Wow. Somebody has to enforce that this is happening. Like I said, we have a portal that helps with that. But also somebody in the office or somebody in the DSO has to make sure this is being completed on a daily basis.
Well, I'm getting ready for a cleaning again. And the next time I go in, I think I may just ask to see a copy of the protocols for their water in the office. They may look at me a little strange, but I feel like I want to ask for that now because, you've raised some red flags as we've been talking today. So, hey, thank you for sharing so generously with us. How can people get in touch with you if they do have questions around water or if they've got a group and they're like, man, Steve, I need to get this problem fixed. How do we get in touch with you?
Absolutely. They can reach out to, our website, which is www.solmetex.com, which is SOLMETEX.com. They can also reach out to me. My email address is scraig, CRAIG, @solmetex.com. We'd love to have conversations. Like I said, my team and I, we're here for both the dealer reps on that side of the business. We're here for the offices to really help support them to build that protocol for their end-to-end water solutions.
Wow. Well, hey, once again, thank you for being an amazing guest. Any closing thoughts before we sign off here, Steve?
No, I just think the closing thought is, you now have probably a little more information you're armed with. Dental unit water lines is probably something we never thought about before. Even individuals in the dental industry. I can't tell you when I go to conventions and shows, and I go to a lot of them, I'll talk to clinicians that have been around for 20, 30 years, and it's just something they never thought of. So like I said, now and now this is, like you said, the golden rule, the right thing to do. It does help keep the practice running at a successful place. It also helps keep everybody safe and compliant, and it helps protect our environment. We only have one environment. We all got to work together to make sure we're doing that. Dentistry is a great place. It's the greatest time to be in dentistry. We just need to make sure that we keep that image up and make sure we keep everybody safe and compliant.
Excellent. Well, hey, thank you again. I know I've certainly learned a whole lot. My eyes have been opened, and I certainly don't want to be one of those frogs on the log deciding to jump off, right? And we don't want you to be one of those frogs on the log. We want you to actually take decisive action. And if you do that, you're going to be able to really build more wealth in your practice. You're going to be able to improve the efficiencies, and you're going to be able to take even better care of the people you love, support the causes you care about, and really make the meaningful impact in the world. But to do that, once again, you have to take decisive action. So, Steve, thank you for sharing with us today.
Tim, I greatly appreciate the time. And like you said, this is all about the dental wealth nation of making sure you're keeping your practice safe, compliant, and making sure that wealth is coming in, because it is a small business at the end of the day. And we not only want to help patients have not only a great oral health environment, but also have an overall health environment. And that's the best way to do it, by keeping them safe and compliant.
Excellent. Well, hey, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you again here soon on the Dental Wealth Nation show.
Appreciate it.
That's a wrap on today's Dental Wealth Nation show. If you've loved today's insight, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and share the wealth with your dental friends. I'm Tim McNeely, and remember, your amazing life of significance is just one smart decision away. Keep thriving, and catch you next time on the Dental Wealth Nation show.